You're watching In the Office. My name is Bray. Let's do some more quote learning. Today for episode number 26, I want to cover this idea about why I think that the best advice tends to get tabled. Now, it's not that the best advice gets tabled by the recipient, it's usually that the best advice never makes it to the receiver. Why? I think mostly it's because of competition. I want to illustrate that by two stories from my personal life. For a short time, I worked with an upholsterer who fixed interiors of classic cars and then, high-end newer vehicles. He had contracts with the local dealerships. If they would get a trade-in, we would pull the seats out, fix the spot, and give it back to them as quick as possible. One day, a man that lived not far down the road who had a business came in and he was getting some work done. And I asked him what he did for a living, and he said, well, I'm a silversmith. Now, I've heard of a goldsmith, but I didn't know there was such a thing as a silversmith. But obviously now it makes sense that there would be. I started asking him a bunch of questions about his business because I'm a very curious person. Then he tells me, son, listen, I appreciate your questions, but the reason that I'm not answering your questions is because the last young man that I answered a bunch of his questions to, he's now my only competition. And I thought, wow, okay, so this guy, he's trying to protect his trade secrets. I get that, I respect that. That great information about a wonderful trade never makes it out to other people because the person is trying to protect their business trade secrets, and I get it. Another story is, you've noticed I've shared it quite a bit about my floors. We had our floors refinished in our house. Our house was built in 1953, and it had really old wood floors that, man, they come back to life. They look great. The first guy I got a quote from, he curiously asked me, have you got a quote from this guy yet? And I said, no, but I plan on it. Well, the guy he was referring to is the guy who is the best in town. And he's actually the guy that trained this guy. And it became very obvious after talking to this guy that he wasn't the specialist. He was the guy who was operating on limited information about his trade. He didn't have all the best advice and best practices that the guy who was known to be the guru of floors. The guy who knew everything about floors was able to quickly tell me, hey, look, with these spots in the floor, we can take the wood out of your closets. That way it matches, and then we'll just replace the wood in one of your closets. That way everything's uniform since this house is 75 years old. That's really the only way to guarantee it. He did it, and it looks absolutely incredible. I couldn't be happier. I think, again, the reason that best advice tends to get tabled is because people don't want to give away their advantages. There are tricks to the trade, and most of the time when you share those with other people, then for a little while they get excited and then they exploit those, and exploit not mean in necessarily a bad way, but they utilize all of those strategies. Maybe when you're taking a lull, or maybe you're so strategic that you're only using some of these strategies in certain seasons of life, but maybe they go gung-ho and it messes up the balance of things with which you're doing. They flood the market with energy, is another way to look at it. I think that that's one side of this coin, that best advice and practice gets tabled because the person wanting to give the advice is like, well, this person may end up using that and it may negatively impact me. I think the second reason why the best advice tends to get tabled, it would be on the receiving end, and it's because that person, they just do not see things the same way as you or I do. I've given advice to some people about getting a job, and they looked at me like I was absolutely crazy, like a cow at a new gate, because I told somebody the way that I got my first couple of jobs was I went out one day and said, I'm not coming home until I have a job. And I went to all the places that I least suspected that I might find a job, in industrial parks and other places, that down streets that I didn't even know, and I come home with a job each one of those times, or applying for jobs for 8 hours in a day, just like you were going to work. Wake up on a Monday morning, work a 40-hour work week, trying to find you a job. That makes sense to me. That's what I would want to do, is put in all of that time so that it fruits out for me. But you can give advice to people, and for one reason or another, they don't receive it because maybe the amount of work related to it, it's not something that they're interested in. best advice, best practices being offered to and from, it's a good thing for it to happen. But again, I think you have to trust the person that you're giving it to, knowing that at some point it may be used against you. Remember the old saying, no good deed goes unpunished? Even the best advice that's been given to me, if I were able to use that to my advantage and it may be negatively impact somebody else, I'm willing to take that chance sometimes. If you give me information that I know that may benefit me, but yet it comes at the expense of someone else who's in that same market share, I'm still going to use the best practices, because there's a lot of competition in the world, and that's what it takes to stay on top. It's very difficult if you get complacent to keep growing in this thing called life. If you get complacent, then you end up giving up some of your best practices, secrets to someone else who has more energy. But also, if you get complacent, then you may receive some good advice or some good information, but not have the willingness to put it into practice. So best advice gets tabled for tons of reasons. This is just scratching the surface. But make sure in your own personal life that if someone confides in you, looks at you as someone worth investing in, and gives you some of this good advice or some of these best practices, please don't look at them like a cow at a new gate. Take out something and write down some notes and try it. Put it to practice. See if it will benefit you and yours. And I think that you'll be happy with the results. And if it doesn't work, well, then you can at least say that you've tried it. But do not just take someone's advice that they're vulnerable enough to share with you, or look at you as valuable enough to share with you, and have disdain towards them, because it takes a lot for someone to want to invest in another. Honor that person back with having enough energy to give it a shot. We're just trying to explore some of those options today. You be thinking on these things. We'll see you next time.